Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks to each one of you for joining us here today. I, Madhu Arora, Member Secretary on behalf of GSICC, that is Gender Sensitization and Internal Complaints Committee, Supreme Court of India, take pride in welcoming Honorable the Chief Justice of India, Honorable Judges of Supreme Court of India, Honorable Judges of High Courts, present and past, and all the other participants to a symposium to observe International Women's Day. Today's symposium has been made special by the presence of Dr. Fumzile Malembo Huka, the Chief Justice for this event. She is the Under Secretary General of the United Nations, and the Executive Director of the United Nations Women. A role model for young girls and people alike, we are delighted to have her in our midst today and look forward to hearing her speak. The fact that this is the first time we are observing Women's Day virtually at the Supreme Court has added more flair to the event. Today, we have with us national and international attendees, and all of us present are a part of revolutionary day that shall always be remembered for years to come. The GSICC is constituted in accordance with gazetted regulations of the Supreme Court of India and are aligned to national laws and international norms. It is dedicated towards working as an instrumental organ in sensitizing the public towards gender-based issues such as addressing complaints regarding sexual harassment at the presence of the Supreme Court of India. This committee regularly organizes programs to spread awareness about gender sensitization in the Supreme Court community through workshops, awareness programs, posters, and displays. It ensures that there is a quick and responsive crisis management, counseling, and mediation in the wake of incidents around sexual harassment within the constitutional body. We at the Supreme Court of India take pride in recognizing and appreciating women for their efforts both at the workplace and outside. From the very beginning, women have been an integral part of this institution and will always continue to be so. Each year, 8th March is observed as Women's Day all across the world to celebrate the importance of the social, economic, cultural, and political achievements of women over the decades. This year, International Women's Day is being marked to specially highlight the challenges brought on by the COVID-19 epidemic. Standing here today in the modern times of 2021, we see that women have come a long way. So let us back at the roots of this day that originated over 100 years ago. The year was 1911, and over 1 million women from across continents such as Austria, Denmark, Germany, and Switzerland joined hands to campaign for women's right to work, vote, and equal opportunities amongst other such gender-based discriminations. However, currently, as I speak, there remains to be a large portion of the female community that continue to fight for human rights. Some of these are equal pay opportunities at the workplace, domestic violence, freedom to feel safe, both at home and outside, and many more prevalent issues. It is a long fight, but we are certain that there exists a uniform world in the future wherein being a woman would mean being a human more than anything else. Once again, I would like to thank all of you for joining us on this precious occasion. I hope, along with me, you continue to inspire and take inspiration from women and contribute towards building a safe, respectable, and discrimination-free society. I now request Ms. V. Mona, member of GSICC, to kindly take over and share a few words. Ms. V. Mona.
Thank you, Madhuji. respected chairperson of GSICC, Justice Indira Banerjee, our special guest, Fumzile Mlambo Kuka, the Undersecretary General for the UN and the Executive Director of United Nations Women, dignitaries on and off the dais. It's a great privilege and honor for me to address this august gathering on this important occasion of International Women's Day on behalf of the GSICC of the Supreme Court of India. The elimination of gender-based discrimination has been one of the fundamentals of the constitutional edifice of India. The principle of gender equality is enshrined in our constitution in its preamble, fundamental rights, fundamental duties, and directive principles. Sexual harassment at workplace is considered as a violation of women's right to equality, life, and liberty. It creates an insecure and hostile work environment which discourages women's participation in work, thereby adversely affecting their social and economic empowerment and the goal of inclusive growth. The Supreme Court of India has been a pioneer in the field of curbing and remedying this menace. In 1992, Bhavri Devi, a social worker employed with the Rural Development Program of the government of Rajasthan, was brutally gang raped on account of her efforts to curb the then prevalent practice of child marriage. This incident revealed the hazards that working women were exposed to on a day-to-day basis and highlighted the urgency for safeguards to be implemented in this regard. Championing the cause of working women in the country, women's rights activists and lawyers filed a PIL as a class action in the Supreme Court under the banner of Vishaka. The Supreme Court, for the first time, acknowledged the glaring legislative inadequacy in workplace sexual harassment as a human rights violation. In the absence of a specific law in India, it laid down certain guidelines and directions, making it mandatory for every employer, either private or public, to provide a mechanism to redress grievances pertaining to workplace sexual harassment till a legislation comes into force. The court incorporated basic principles of human rights enshrined in Constitution of India and provisions of conventions on elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, CEDA, which has been ratified in 1993 by the Government of India. Reliance was placed on the Fourth World Conference on Women in Beijing, by which a commitment was made to set up a Women's Human Rights Commission for construing the nature and ambit of constitutional guarantee of gender equality in our constitution. Subsequent directions are also issued in A.K. Chopra's case, expanding the definition of sexual harassment, and Medha Kotwal Lely's case regarding scope and nature of inquiries conducted by the internal committees. It is when certain instances of voyeurism were shown to have happened in precincts of Delhi High Court, the Supreme Court took the opportunity and framed the gender sensitization and sexual harassment of women at the Supreme Court of India, Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Regulations 2013 for itself. The central legislation was brought into force thereafter. The GSICC is currently headed by our respected chairperson, Justice Ms. Indira Banerjee, and there are 9 members at present, out of which 2 are external members. Inquiry under the GSICC is done by an internal subcommittee, which would comprise of 3 members, the majority being women. There is a detailed procedure in place for inquiries and nature of penalty imposed, provisions for appeal, etc. The internal subcommittee is a fact-finding committee and strict confidentiality is maintained. The GSICC has been very effectively and sincerely performing its functions under the guidance of its successive chairpersons. The year 2020 has been very challenging. The world became familiar with stay-at-home and shelter-in-place orders, unprecedented measures adopted to keep us safe in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. Though we may tend to think that this might reduce physical workplace harassment, women have faced more than normal pressure. It has affected a lot of domestic relationship and childcare. A new form of workplace through the digital invitation into one's home via video conferences have opened up new challenges that also requires awareness and sensitizing the people to be mindful of their words, actions, and digital presence. This may require new thinking and approach. COVID-19 lockdown has posed a lot of challenges for many women professionals who have been working from home for such a long period and struggling to manage the work-life balance. The definition and concept of workplace itself has changed with all its advantages and some disadvantages. It is occasions like these celebrations that go a long way in motivating and inspiring us, that rekindles the fire in us. It also creates awareness among people regarding women's rights and gender equality. On this Women's Day, we shall all recall all the achievements in every field made by women around us in all spheres and take inspiration from them. Let us challenge the new challenges. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mona, for throwing more light on the functions of GSICC. I am positive that the establishment of this committee has enabled our institution to be a safer workplace that safeguards the interests of women. Moving forward, I would like to take this opportunity to request the chairperson of GSICC, Justice Indira Banerjee, to address the occasion.
A very good evening to all of you. The chief guest of this evening, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, Undersecretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of UN Women. Chief Justice and Judges of the Supreme Court of India, Chief Justice and Judges of other high courts, present and past, Justice Bopanna and other members of the Gender Sensitization and Internal Complaints Committee of the Supreme Court, ladies and gentlemen. To quote the great Indian sage Swami Vivekananda, just as a bird cannot fly with one wing, the nation cannot march forward if the women are left behind. B.R. Ambedkar, the chairman of the drafting committee of the Constituent Assembly, which drafted the Constitution of India, said, I quote, I measure the progress of a community by the degree of progress women have achieved. Freedom cannot be achieved unless women have been emancipated from all kinds of oppression, said Nelson Mandela. In his book, Due Process of Law, Lord Denning wrote, a woman feels as keenly, thinks as clearly as a man. She in her sphere does work as useful as a man does in his. She has as much right to her freedom to develop her personality to the full as a man. When she marries, she does not become the husband's servant, but his equal partner. If his work is more important in the life of the community, hers is more important in the life of the family. Neither can do without the other. Neither is above the other or under the other. They are equal. Given the opportunity, women have excelled in every sphere of life. In ancient India, we have examples of renowned intellectuals like Gargi and Maitreyi, whose knowledge of the Vedas very few men could match. We have had literatures like the great Tamil poetess Avaiyar, whose name has lived through centuries. The world has seen monarchs like Maria Theresa of Austria, the great benevolent despot, Queen Victoria, during whose reign the sun is said never to have set in the British Empire. In medieval India, we had the great warrior Razia Sultana. The Rani of Jhansi, Lakshmi Bai, led the first war of Indian independence against the British in 1857. There are more recent examples of Prime Minister Golda Meir, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, President Sirimavo Bandaranaike, Prime Minister Benazir Bhutto, President Khalida Zia, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, all of whom were assertive and effective. There are innumerable examples of cosmonauts who have been women. We have had Kalpana Chawlas, but unfortunately, they are few and far between. And the lot of the women in general is rather different. The right to equality, irrespective of gender, is a basic human right, recognized, reaffirmed, and reiterated in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the United Nations on 10th December 1948, particularly Articles 1, 2, and 7, which declare all human beings are born free and are equal in dignity and rights. Everyone is entitled to all the rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration without distinction of any kind. All are equal and are entitled without any discrimination to equal protection of the law. We have the International Covenant of Civil and Political Rights and the International Covenant for Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which expressly obligates state parties to ensure equal rights of men and women to enjoyment of all the rights mentioned in those covenants. The previous speaker has referred to the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, 1979, popularly referred to as the CEDAW, and said to be the Women's Bill of Rights. And we also have the Vienna Convention on the Elimination of Violence Against Women. These instruments recognize, amongst others, the right of women to equality, the right against discrimination, the right to economic parity, property, privacy, right against domestic violence, against sexual abuse, so on and so forth. Article 1 of the Convention refers to two types of discriminatory acts: those that purposely discriminate against women and those which, though not deliberate, result in discrimination. This is stereotyping of the roles expected of men and women. Soon after the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted, our Constitution was framed, and all the human rights, including the right to equality, have been included in our Constitution as fundamental rights. And if one looks into the preamble, which has now been held to be part of the Constitution of India, the principles therein constitute unalterable basic feature of the Constitution of India. Women's equality is an unalterable aspect of the Constitution of India. Yet, Justice Leela Seth, the first Indian woman to be appointed Chief Justice of a High Court, once lamented, "Women are half the world and hold half the sky. But where are they when it comes to equality? Systematic gender-based discrimination is not unique to any particular country or region, but is universal. Almost all over the world, women face inequality and discrimination." As I just stated a little while ago, in India, the Constitution mandates elimination of discrimination and violence against women. In addition, India's commitments under international conventions and instruments have to be honored. But the effectiveness of any law or instrument depends to a great extent on those who implement and interpret them. As the guardian of rights, the judiciary is duty-bound to secure justice to women. Gender justice cannot effectively be achieved by a conservative formal interpretation of the right to equality to mean only equal treatment of lights and equal protection of the law. The courts have to be proactive. The principles of substantive equality have to be applied in interpreting the right to equality. And the Supreme Court of India has time and again secured the rights of women by interpreting the provisions of the Constitution in a purposive way. Vishakha's case has been referred to by my previous speaker. In the case of Bodhisattva Gautam, the Supreme Court held that rape was not merely an offense under criminal law, but was a violation of the fundamental right of a woman to life and liberty, guaranteed by Article 21. In Chairman, Railway Board and others versus Chandrima Das, the Supreme Court awarded compensation of rupees 10 lakhs to a foreign woman who had been raped within railway premises. In state of Maharashtra, and another versus Indian Hotel and Restaurants Association and others, the Supreme Court protected the right of bar dancers to earn a living by upholding the decision of the Bombay High Court, quashing the ban on dance bars, observing it would be more appropriate to take measures to secure the safety and improve working conditions of bar girls. Unfortunately, the constitutional status of religious personal laws which relate to marriage, divorce, adoptions, succession, etc., sometimes perpetuate gender equality. The competing and conflicting principles of religious freedom of citizens and gender equality for women poses a major challenge to the judicial system in India and in some parts of the world. The question which troubles judicial conscience across jurisdictions is whether it is not necessary for the judiciary to step in if the religious communities do not reform their personal laws and their religious rights and customs and address the issues in the light of the obligations cast by CEDAW. Very recently, about 3 years back, on 22nd August 2017, the Supreme Court of India declared triple talaq an Islamic practice that allowed men to divorce their wives immediately by uttering the word talaq 3 times as unconstitutional. In Geeta Hariharan versus Reserve Bank of India, the Supreme Court interpreted Section 6 of the Hindu Minority and Guardianship Act 1956 and held that a mother could act as a natural guardian of the minor even during the lifetime of the father if the father was not in charge of the affairs of the minor. In 2018, a 5-judge constitution bench struck down as unconstitutional an archaic colonial statutory provision demeaning to the dignity of women, that is Section 497 of the Indian Penal Code. The cases are many. Discriminatory service rules have been struck down to ensure that women are not denied the right to work. Examples are many. On 15 September 1995, the United Nations adopted the Beijing Declaration to promulgate a set of principles for the equality of men and women. After 26 years, we need to evaluate the progress of gender equality, identify global standards, and formulate concrete policies to promote gender equality and advancement of women worldwide. We are privileged to have amongst us as chief guest and keynote speaker, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, an outstanding woman, a distinguished leader, not just of her own country, but a world leader and a champion of education and empowerment of women. Dr. Mlambo Ngcuka was born in Clermont on 3rd November 1955. Her parents, Sabbath and Michael Mlango, instilled in her leadership qualities from a very young age. Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka matriculated from Olange High School, after which she graduated in social science and education from the University of Lesotho. She obtained her PhD from the University of Warwick in the United Kingdom. Dr. Mlambo Ngcuka started her career as a teacher and educator. She worked as a lecturer at the Mpumalanga Teachers Training College, after which she moved to Geneva to work for the World Young Women's Christian Association, where she gained international experience as coordinator. She started a global program of young women and got herself involved in the struggle to end apartheid in Africa. Dr. Ngcuka had worked with civil society and with non-government entities. She is the founder of Mlambo Foundation, which supports leadership education. Dr. Ngcuka was Member of Parliament of South Africa from 1994 to 1996 and participated in its first democratic government. She served as Deputy Minister in the Department of Trade and Industry from 1996 to 1999, and thereafter as Minister from 1999 to 2005. From 2005 to 2008, Dr. Ngcuka was the Deputy President of South Africa. As Deputy President, Dr. Ngcuka oversaw programs to combat poverty and worked for empowerment of women. We are looking forward to hear Dr. Ngcuka. I invite Dr. Ngcuka to deliver her address this evening.
Thank you very much, and good evening. Honorable judges, distinguished guests, thank you to the Gender Sensitization and Internal Complaints Committee of the Supreme Court of India for organizing this forum to celebrate International Women's Day. We salute the women and girls of India for their great contribution to the world and to India. India was amongst the first member states to endorse the United Nations Secretary General's appeal to the world leaders to put women and girls at the center of their efforts to recover from COVID-19. We wish India and all its people the best recovery. We also applaud measures taken to prioritize the needs of women and girls as this crisis continues to unfold. I also want to congratulate the Supreme Court of India for the fundamental role you continue to play in supporting the women and children of India in their quest for equality and dignity. Your landmark decisions, such as the recent judgment granting permanent commissions to women in the armed forces, have the capability to profoundly impact the opportunities available to Indian women. This builds on previous notable judgments from the court, such as the 1997 GSICC case, a landmark ruling that paved the way for the 2013 Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act, the 2016 verdict to regulate the sale of acid and issue guidelines to support acid attack survivors, and the decriminalization of homosexuality in 2018. We know that the law is a reflection of society's evolution as norms continue to change. We know also that the laws on their own are not enough to ensure that women live a life that is fulfilling. It is vital that legislation is accompanied by purposeful implementation all the way so that it can benefit its intended targets. In recognizing the intersection of women as beneficiaries, both of the law and of gender justice, the Supreme Court of India has helped to set a standard for other countries in the region and beyond. Today, I also want to celebrate the women of India who, through their jobs, activism, and grassroots organizing, have made indelible mark on society and in the world. I am a beneficiary of the leadership of Indian women. As a young activist, I interacted with activists in India, scholars, youth leaders, and learned a lot from those experiences. At the UN itself, I was welcomed and given orientation by none other than Madam Lakshmi Puri, as well as Lopa Banerjee, for whose stewardship I am grateful. Over the years, feminists in India have spearheaded significant socio-economic movements with determination and inclusiveness. They have demonstrated the power of speaking together in one voice and drawn momentum from grassroots networks. We celebrate the Indian women and women-owned enterprises for creating economic activity in their communities. We have seen them now during the pandemic participating in producing supplies and exports that were needed as PPE. India's role in the production of life-saving COVID-19 vaccine, which has involved the scientists and manufacturers of India, has been laudable for the contribution it has made to save people in the world as well as in India. We also today salute the 6 million Indian women who are frontline workers. We say to them, Happy International Women's Day, and we thank them for their work. One of the most severe impacts of this pandemic worldwide has been what we call the shadow pandemic, which is the shadow pandemic of violence against women, which has increased tremendously during the pandemic. In India, the National Commission for Women reported that domestic violence complaints increased many times nationwide during lockdown. The gender-based pandemic needs the same dedication as we have shown in fighting the health pandemic for it to end. It needs its own frontline workers who are dedicated to uproot it. The frontline workers of the gender-based pandemic are the police. It is you, the judiciary. It is social workers. It is families. It is civil society. It is men who refuse to be bystanders. To stop the infection by the virus, we took big steps. Countries closed borders. They curtailed freedom of people. Schools were closed. This level of intensity of fighting the health pandemic is the same intensity that we need to fight the pandemic of gender-based violence. We need to be proactive. We need to take preventative measures, and you need to also help us by setting precedent in your judgment that deters impunity. Repeat offenders do it because they can. Because in many countries, nothing happens when men inflict violence on women. In that way, they feel emboldened to repeatedly abuse women. In your station in lives, you are the front line workers who can dispense justice in a manner that helps society know that women's rights are human rights. The orientation towards women's rights also needs to be addressed from an early age amongst our children at the schools, but especially in law schools, so that those who graduate with law degrees are liberated from the beliefs that are harmful to women and girls, and they are determined to protect the rights of women. We have watched in many countries with shock when there has been judgment that make light of crimes against women, such as abduction of women and children for forced marriage, the ill treatment of widows, the stolen inheritance of widows, the denied custody of children, the unfair labor practices that exploit women's labors, all normalized by cultural beliefs that are harmful women, as well as by treatment in courts when women have taken their complaints that seem to suggest that these are not serious crimes. I cannot overemphasize the need to urgently scale up the efforts to educate our public about crimes against women, to prevent violence against women and girls, and to make sure that our legal system is part and parcel of the shelter that women can look up to when it is times of difficulties. I want to commend India for its successful intervention when it comes to easy access of helplines, the secure of shelter services, the bystander intervention awareness, and gender violence sensitization of the police and the justice sector. It is commendable that India has made ending violence against women part of its national COVID plan and deemed violence against women services as essential services. Let me also comment on the safety of women in public places. Addressing women in public places is essential. New Delhi is one of the founding members of UN Women's Safe City and Safe Public Places Global Initiative. And in Mumbai, Maharashtra, in partnership with Coro, a network of 33 organizations, the Safe City program launched the Rights to Pee campaign to create awareness of the challenges faced by women and girls due to lack of safe and clean public toilets. This resulted in commitment of the fund that then led to the building of free public toilets and for women and girls. Our Safe City programs has generated best practice that are being shared by other cities around the world. We have also seen during this pandemic the loss of jobs and its disproportionate impacts on women and on girls who have also dropped out of schools in many cases. Women have lost 2/3 of the jobs that have been lost during this pandemic. These are mainly unprotected jobs with no benefits, with no possibilities to have contracts that are enforceable, and these are jobs that are also not protected by the labor law. This has pushed women into extreme poverty, especially young women with young children between the ages in the 20s and the 30s. This is showing that we need to intervene, and these women still have a long life ahead of them. Rebuilding from the COVID crisis, therefore, means prioritizing women's economic empowerment and recovery for the short and the long term. We know that in India, 29.1% of women aged between 25 and 45 are in the labor force, compared to 97.8 men of the same age, suggesting that we need to work harder to create jobs for women so that they can enjoy greater economic prosperity as well as economic autonomy. Further, upwards of 90% of women's employment in India is informal, which is the same in sub-Saharan Africa. We are therefore calling on governments, on international finance institutions to support governments in many of these countries with a high number of the informal sector to create interventions and relief measures that are targeting the women in the informal sector who have very little possibility to recover from this pandemic. We also are noticing, however, that in many countries of the world, the fiscal intervention and the fiscal stimulus that have been announced by government are gender blind. They do not have a dedicated mechanisms to support women. We've seen that about 80% of these interventions do not benefit women. We are therefore engaging governments of the world on these very important issues. We have applauded measures of governments that have targeted women, such as the relief measures by the Colombian government that are dedicated to support rural women, or social protection in many countries that are targeted families, or daycare stimulus intervention in South Africa. UN Women and UNDP's COVID-19 Global Response Tracker has found that 2,280 fiscal, social protection, and labor market measures taken in response to COVID. Only 13% mention women specifically as a targeted group for economic security, and only 11% address the rising unpaid care demands. It will be vital for governments to focus on the need to build gender-responsive social protection system as part of efforts to move workers out of the informal employment and implement policies to support unpaid care work. In India, I am glad to see that there are a number of existing cash transfer programs that have been strengthened. For example, about 200 million have benefited for some of these schemes. Another scheme to the National Social Assistance Program has targeted older persons, widows, and persons with disabilities. In addition, cooking gas cylinders have been provided free of cost for 3 months for women who benefit from schemes that distribute gas connections to women in low-income households. And these are the measures we applaud. Ladies and gentlemen, here at the United Nations, we are in the midst of the 65th Commission on the Status of Women, which this year is focusing on women's leadership and participation in public life. It also includes a focus on violence against women, especially as violence affects women who are in public office. We are calling for an enabling environment for women's leaders to be able to take on leadership without any blockage from their own political parties, sometimes from legal dispensation, even from violence, which is very prevalent. Many women who have run for office have reported experiencing violence, physical violence, sexual violence, even death. They have also experienced cyberbullying, and this type of violence affects women all over the world, and women of all ranks, from local councillors to women heads of state. This is something that needs to be addressed as it compromises our democracies. The US Vice President Kamala Harris yesterday, speaking at the Commission of the Status of Women, pointed out the importance of women's participation to make our democracies credible. She said the inclusion of women is a marker of a healthy democracy, so that we need to challenge the absence of women in many democracies. In building back better our countries, as we emerge from the crisis, we need to address this issue of women's leadership. For instance, 18% of the task teams that are set up to address COVID have committees that are predominantly men. This means that the men will be addressing issues that affect women with minimal participation of women. Women will have a minimum say on issues that are critical to them. This self-imposed responsibility by men on themselves to address women's issues without the insight of women is something that we have to move to stop at this point in time. On average, globally, 75% of legislators in parliaments are also men. That too is a concern. India ranks 122 globally out of 150 countries when it comes to women's representatives in parliament. This means that we have some work to do in India. But happily, when it comes into women elected in local government institutions, there are over 1.4 elected women representatives, and that is a good practice. Evidence shows that achieving parity in the representation requires special measures. We have seen these measures working in other parts of the world. The well-designed and effectively implemented gender quotas and targets accompanied with political will do make a difference. India has a particularly good example in its constitution, which not only grants equality to women, but also empower the state to adopt measures of positive discrimination in favor of women, one of the few countries to do so. The 73rd Amendment to the Constitution also support women's participation in local decision-making process, with 33% reservation for women in the Panchayat system, where women occupy 46% of the positions in the three-tier panchayatas. I encourage leaders to continue to set these examples and to support also the inclusion of young women in decision-making. Some countries, age has been a factor in excluding young women from office, where the entry and threshold has been set very high, requiring women to be above the age of 35 in order for them to participate in public office. We still have many laws to change in the world, not just those that affect women's leadership. We still have to change laws that affect the criminalization of violence against women. All over the countries, we ask judges to assist us pro bono in order to enable and support parliamentarians to change these laws. There are 144 countries who have passed laws that address violence against women. However, we are noticing that many of these laws also do not include the issue of consent as an important aspect in addressing, for instance, rape. This is something that we want to address. In many countries where we have religion and traditional authority dominant, we have the hardest time in changing laws in line with the human rights dispensation. Ladies and gentlemen, we have generation equality now, where we are trying to respond to the unfinished business that was started in Beijing 25 years ago. We are also addressing the slow progress in implementing the SDGs. And of course, we are also responding to the problems caused by the pandemic. Generation equality brings together governments, private sector, young people. It brings together academics in a quest to fast track the changes. It is a 5-year program that will take us to 2026, where we expect that we have moved in the areas that are stubborn and are critical to advance gender equality. We thank India and our UN Women Office in India for having been proactive in popularizing generation equality, in establishing webinars with civil society and government in India in order to plan on how they will participate in generation equality. They have also brought in private sector. In March, in the end of March this year, in Mexico, we will be pulling together the package of generation equality And in June in Paris, we will conclude by announcing how we will be fast-tracking generation equality identified action, which include an integration of a campaign of the Prime Minister of India on the gender responsive procurement. We look forward to see India participating in these bold and transformative actions of generation equality, which will advance the implementation of the Beijing Platform for Action, advance the implementation of Sustainable Development Goals, and respond to the pandemic. This is a form of multilateralism reimagined, which has been forced to us by the slow progress to gender equality. The justice sector is very important. No thriving democracy in the world has got a justice sector that is inactive. It is when the justice sector is active that democracy thrives and development progresses. We thank you in India for taking the many steps that has benefited the women and girls of your country. Thank you.
That was truly remarkable. Thank you, Dr. Phumzile, for your brave and inspiring words. Your journey has been nothing but short of extraordinary, and it shall always inspire not only women, but all of humanity all around the world. I salute you for all your words and endeavors in your fights to make this society an equal society. As we move forward and concluding this symposium, I now request Mr. Jaydeep Gupta, member GSICC, to deliver the vote of thanks. Mr. Jaydeep Gupta.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Ms. Aurora. At the end of those wonderful presentations, it is my privilege and pleasant duty to thank today's speakers. Let me start with my colleague, Ms. V. Mohana, Senior Advocate of the Supreme Court of India and member of our committee, for your excellent and informative survey of the developments in protection of women and gender sensitization in India, especially in the Supreme Court. Thank you for explaining the work of the committee in this sphere. We must remember that the Supreme Court of India is unique amongst judicial bodies around the world for the manner in which it pioneered the protection of women in workplaces by issuing what we call the Vishakha Guidelines. Thank you, Justice Indira Banerjee, Chairperson of the Gender Sensitization Committee, for your thought-provoking address. As you pointed out, despite magnificent examples in our history of women who lead from the front and the laws that protect women, ordinary women continue to be discriminated and oppressed. Thank you very much, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo Kuka, for agreeing to address us through the video link. The pandemic has thrown up huge challenges, as you point out, but some surprising opportunities as well. One of them is that we have been able to get you as our keynote speaker for this year's event. It was a real pleasure to listen to your approach to issues which affect the life of half of the world's population. As you pointed out, the necessity is for purposeful implementation of the laws and the importance of grassroots work in doing so. You spoke of the shadow pandemic of violence against women during the COVID pandemic and other challenges which have been thrown up at the same time. Your words on generation equality are truly inspiring. Thank you, Ms. Madhu Arora, Member Secretary of the Gender Sensitization Committee, for anchoring today's program. I would also like to thank the Chairperson, Justice Indira Banerjee, Justice Bopanna, and other members of the Gender Sensitization Committee who are here with us and who have joined by video link, for having got together to put this program together. We thank the Chief Justice of India and the judges of the Supreme Court, past and present, Chief Justices and Honorable Judges of the High Courts across India, both past and present, for joining this symposium and giving their encouragement and blessings. I also would like to take this opportunity to thank Ms. Lopa Banerjee, Deputy Director at UN Women, for suggesting that we get in touch with Dr. Lambo Nguka and for helping us to set up today's symposium. Thanks also to Amy and other members of Dr. Mlambo Nguka's office and the Supreme Court Registry in India for making this program possible. And thanks to all who have joined us today digitally to make this program a success. We are looking forward to a year of hope and achievement at the end of a challenging period. Thank you, one and all.